Welcome to Friday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live right here on Giants.com and the Giants mobile app. If you're watching this, you might wonder why we're apart on Zoom. Well, that's because as a kind of break before the regular season starts, our production department was given off this Friday. So we are taking off as well, doing this from home and doing this in advance. So we're not taking calls today on Big Blue Kickoff Live. This is a recorded show. And every year we like to do a season preview. So we figured this was the perfect day to put it up on this Friday, heading into the final weekend without NFL football until late February. So John Schmalk, Paul Destino, Lance Meadow on Big Blue Kickoff Live. We'll be back Monday at our regularly scheduled time, 12:30, back on our regular season schedule, live, taking your calls, previewing the Giants season. So, gentlemen, every year the NFL is tipsy-turvy. You don't know who's going to be good, who's going to be bad. And Lance, we've spoken about this a lot. Every year, about half the playoff teams tend to flip over and change. So you would think this is an easy exercise, but it's not. And when you take a look at these two conferences, they're very different in how they operate. So given we've talked mostly about the NFC, I figure we'll start the AFC. We'll work our way from west to east, so left to right on your map, and we'll end with the NFC East and the Giants and, of course, all those teams there. So why don't we start out in the AFC West? What we're going to do here, folks, we'll give you our division winners. We will give you our wild card teams, who's going to be the championship games, the Super Bowl, and then we're going to talk about some of the individual awards as well. So that's what's going to be on the docket for today's Big Blue Kickoff Live. Paul, why don't we start with you? Who do you have winning the AFC West, and do you have any wild card teams coming out of that division?
Well, the first answer is easy. I mean, anybody who's going to pick a Kansas City Chiefs is probably making a serious mistake. So,
I did that last year, and you're right, I did.
so we'll go with Kansas City. I just don't see that they've had any drop-off of note that's going to bring them back to the rest of the division. So really, let me spend more of my time trying to explain to you why I did not take another team in that division. I'm a big Justin Herbert guy. I think that they are coming along, but there's something about me that just can't seem to pick the Chargers. I gave them serious consideration as a wild card, especially because the division, to me, is more substandard than the other divisions in the AFC. So I thought that they might pick up some wins within the division and maybe sneak a wild card in there. Ultimately, I did not go that way. I'm sticking with the Chiefs.
You know, it's funny. Last year we talked about how great the AFC West was going to be, and then the Raiders fell apart, the Broncos fell apart, and to your point, Paul, the division ended up not being great. But I think, Lance, and you can obviously, give your take there, but I'll just say this, the AFC is tough. I have like 3 or 4 crossouts on my sheet here for AFC playoff teams. It was not easy to narrow this down, Lance. How did you have the AFC West?
Yeah, well, the AFC is night and day compared to the NFC. It's not even close in terms of the substance and the caliber of play. And you go division by division, you see so much more competition. I think the NFC is wide open. So I think if you get your act together this year, you may very well have a nice pathway to the Super Bowl. But getting back to the AFC West, I would agree with Paul. It's hard to pick against the Chiefs. They've been the model of consistency, and they proved last season. This, to me, was the biggest takeaway from last season. For anybody that thinks if you remove one player on the offensive side of the ball, that Kansas City is going to fall off a cliff and Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes are not going to be able to survive, they quieted all the skeptics. There was no Tyreek Hill. They did not miss a beat. Yes, as Mark raises his hand. So why would I all of a sudden second guess the outlook of the Chiefs, even though there is some new personnel, but I think it's going to be business as usual. If anything concerns me, guys, it's Steve Spagnuolo on the defensive side of the ball. Chris Jones, as we're recording this, is still holding out. He had 15.5 sacks last season. That's not easy to make up for. So that's a bit of a wild card. But if there's any team, guys, that can get through an offensive clinic week in and week out and survive, it's the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, I do have a wild card team.
Yeah, go ahead, Lance. I'm sorry, Lance. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say I do have a wild card team coming out of this division. I thought about the Chargers. My concern is somebody's going to pick up the voodoo doll again and not put it down. The injuries just happen every single year.
Lance, by the way, no one has to pick it up. They've been holding it for like the last 6 years.
Right. Well, in fairness, they did make it last season. So they were able to put it down for a few seconds, and then all of a sudden they said, you know what, the Chargers had enough fun in the first half. Let the Jaguars come back. We'll pick up the voodoo doll all over again. And they have an overwhelming amount of size around Justin Herbert. There's a lot to like. It's hard to trust this team durability-wise getting through the season. I'm very high on the Denver Broncos. I think Sean Payton is going to come in, and I think he is going to put his stamp on this team.
Wow.
Yeah. I look at what he did with New Orleans. Guys, his last season, they went 9-8. He started 4 different quarterbacks. And I get it. Russell Wilson has a lot to overcome. But that defense was top 10 material last season. And that hasn't drastically changed. Javonte Williams is back in the backfield. I know there's some injuries at receiver. But once again, I trust Sean Payton. I value his track record. That means a lot. It's different personnel. But if anyone's going to be able to fix that offense, it is a head coach that was with New Orleans and was able to navigate the ups and downs. So I'm going to go with a true wild card team by definition, and that is the Denver Broncos coming out of the AFC West.
Wow. All right. I like it. We're getting juicy early here. And I think the Broncos are going to be better. I'm just not sure they're going to be. I think they'll be 500. I'm just not sure they're going to be quite good enough in a very tough conference to get there. I agree. Look, I think it's hard to argue the Chiefs, but I do think they're going to be a little bit worse this year because of the Chris Jones thing. And look, but Mahomes is Mahomes, right? And they did lose Juju Smith-Schuster. He's not there anymore, but they replaced him with guys that are good enough. And Travis Kelce and Mahomes are just so good. You do wonder if Kelce at some point is going to take a step back, though. He is 33 years old, right, if I'm not mistaken. So at some point, if he takes a step back, does that then change your offense a little bit? We'll see. But no, I'm with you. Can't pick against the Chiefs. I did not. It's funny. When I did this yesterday, I sat there and I did not have the Chargers in my initial list of wildcard teams. Then I put them in there. I took a look at the strength of schedule, and the Chargers are around 13th, tied for 12th in terms of strength of schedule. So their schedule is not impossible. I think adding Kellen Moore will help. They'll push the ball down the field a little bit more. Remember, they were missing Rashawn Slater all year last year, their starting left tackle as well. He's back and healthy. Zion Johnson, the offensive lineman out of Boston College, you spoke about last year a lot. He's going back to his natural position at, I believe, left guard instead of right guard where he played last year. Maybe it's flipped. It's one or the other. But he's going back to his natural spot. I just think they're going to be good enough to make the playoffs because of Justin Herbert. I don't think they're going to probably win a playoff round, but I think they'll get there. We'll see if that's enough to keep the head coach in his job, because I do think this is a very important year for him, whether or not he can stay in that position after a couple disappointing years, and we'll see how that goes. But I do have the Chargers in. Make sure you go and subscribe to the Giants Huddle podcast. Long-form interviews, Giants players, coaches, you name it, we got it. This week, check it out. We got some good stuff coming up. We have our Writers Roundtable airing on Friday. We have our David Tyree interview. We have our Matt Sims interview. Go check it out. Enjoy it on your weekend on the Giants Huddle podcast. Podcast platforms everywhere, giants.com/podcast, or your Giants mobile app. Giant fans, take your fans to the next level with a season ticket membership. Stay connected to the club all year round, not just on game days. Memberships are now available for the 2023 season. To learn more about all the exclusive member benefits, visit giants.com/tickets. Limited inventory is available. All right, let's go next. We'll go, let's go AFC South, because I think that division probably is a little bit less exciting. And I'll go first here, guys, and I think this is an easy one. I would be shocked if the Jacksonville Jaguars do not win this division. I'm not a Tennessee Titans believer. I do think they'll be better this year because they had a lot of injuries last year. That probably won't be the case again. Harold Landry will be back. Ryan Tannehill, you hope, is healthy for most of the year. You hope their offensive line is a little bit better. They had tried to address that in the offseason. But look, Jacksonville played their best football at the end of last year. They won a playoff game. Trevor Lawrence is doing well. He's getting better. Calvin Ridley was brought in this offseason. I think he's going to have a monster year. They bring back Evan Ingram. I do worry about Jacksonville's defense a little bit. Last year, their numbers were not good. They're very young. They're counting on second-year and third-year players to really step up and become what they want them to be. Don't think they're there yet, which is why I don't have them as a, championship game, Super Bowl contender, but I think the offense will be good enough to help them win this division. How about you, Lance?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Jacksonville will come out of the AFC South. I was encouraged with what I saw down the stretch. I know it took a 7-game losing streak from Tennessee for the Jaguars to win the division. But remember, it was Doug Peterson's first year. Trevor Lawrence was once again learning a new offense. That team's going to benefit from continuity. You mentioned the addition of Calvin Ridley. I don't think that should be overlooked. And I was impressed with the defense from the standpoint of they did have a lot of young guys. I thought they were opportunistic, all things considered. And I think just like the offensive side of the ball, they'll benefit from the continuity factor. My concern about Tennessee is this going to be the year where just because you add DeAndre Hopkins that the passing attack is going to complement Derrick Henry? And remember, you talked about you got to wonder if some of these guys get up there in age on Kansas City. Derrick Henry's not getting any younger.
Yep.
Is he going to now all of a sudden take additional hits? Is he going to be able to survive an entire season? Tennessee's had questions up front in terms of their offensive line. They haven't necessarily been an offensive juggernaut. So I'm a little bit concerned from that standpoint. And we saw what happened when you didn't have an electric offense last season. I mean, that division was right in front of them to run away with. And they still couldn't finish the job, even though the Jaguars were trying to get their act together. So I look at this. You mentioned about the Jaguars defense. Keep in mind, C.J. Stroud, Anthony Richardson. You got 2 rookie quarterbacks in that division. That should help the Jaguars defense to take care of business once again in-house. And then I think, are they going to run away with things with their other opponents? No, but they should be able to win enough games to survive a division that overall is extremely young when you compare it to the rest of the NFL landscape.
And you don't have any wild card teams out of that division either.
No
neither do I.
teams out of
How about you, Paul? I assume you're just going to say, I agree with both of you.
Yeah, I am, but I'm going to add one other thing, and that is in the AFC, if there's one team that really has a shooting star on the way up, it's got to be Jacksonville. We already saw the strides that they made last year, the new coaching staff, the new quarterback. They've got a lot of young players. They've already gone through a bunch of their retooling. You've got teams in that division who, in my opinion, are miles behind in terms of the retooling, the rebuilding. It's going to be a while before either Houston, Indianapolis, or Tennessee are on the upswing again. So I think Jacksonville's in good shape for not only this year, but I think they should probably go into next season even thinking that they're the favorites to win the division.
And just FYI, you talk about the weak division, and they play the NFC South as well. Just FYI. The Titans, Colts, and Texans have the 3rd, 4th, and 5th easiest strength of schedules in football. So don't be surprised if Jacksonville walks out of this regular season with like 12 wins. Like, that's not out of the realm of possibility given what's on their schedule here.
John, I'm even thinking in my mind they're a absolute contender for a top 2 seed.
Yep. I'm with you 100%. I think just because of the schedule in the division. All right, Paul.
Well, keep in mind, though, I was just going to say real quickly, the NFC South was all sub 500 last season. There's no way that's happening again this season. I mean, we saw that with the NFC East from 2020 to 21. Those teams are going to improve. I'm not saying that it's going to be overwhelming, but it's going to be far more challenging than having played those teams last season.
Yep, so I agree. Though remember,
look out for
the Bucs lost Tom Brady, so they're not going to be quite as tough. And Panthers have a rookie quarterback. But yeah, I think that the Saints and the Falcons will be better specifically. All right, let's go now, Paul, to the let's start with you this time, Lance. You haven't led off yet. Let's go NFC North, which I think might be the toughest division here to break down. I think you can make an argument for all 4 of these teams as playoff teams this year.
Yeah, I think the AFC North may be the best division in football you can make a case for when you take the NFC into consideration. We got a taste of that last season when you saw, even though I know Cleveland had a down year and they brought in Deshaun Watson, but Jacoby Brissett kept that team competitive before obviously Watson was extremely rusty. And I thought Kenny Pickett showed some really nice flashes down the stretch last season. And I'll never bet against the Steelers, considering Mike Tomlin and that team has never been below 500 since he took over as the head coach in 2007. I've got 2 teams coming out of the AFC North. I have the Bengals winning the division. It's hard to bet against this Cincinnati offense. I know Joe Burrow is missing the offseason because of the calf injury, but guys, he has never had a conventional offseason since he entered the league. 2020 was the pandemic. 2021 was the significant knee injury, and then he had the appendectomy last year. So Joe Burrow missing time in training camp is not alarming. Last time I checked, that actually has been a good omen for him. And they're bringing back all their personnel. They've been very consistent with Lou Anarumo on the defensive side of the ball as well. Barring major injuries, hard for me to think the Bengals are going to take a huge step back. The team, though, I'm most excited about in this division is the Baltimore Ravens. And I have them as a wild card. You have a new offensive coordinator in Todd Monken. He is not going to do what Greg Roman has done, which is focus heavily on the run. They're going to look to open up the passing game. And they brought in a lot of personnel to help Lamar Jackson. They brought in Odell Beckham, love Zay Flowers in the draft. Rashad Bateman hopefully will stay healthy. He's been dealing with foot issues. If all of those guys stay together, not to mention Mark Andrews at tight end and the plethora of running backs, lacking personnel is not an issue in Baltimore. And they've had a pretty steady defense ever since John Harbaugh has been there. and it hasn't necessarily dropped off even with McMartindale coming over to the Giants. So I like the Bengals winning the division. I like the Ravens getting a wild card. And I think the Steelers are going to be in the thick of things till the very end. I'm just a little bit concerned about the revamped offensive line and whether or not the weapons around Kenny Pickett are going to do enough to move the needle. So I have them in the mix, but just missing out.
All right, Paul, how about you?
Yeah, I got Cincinnati winning the division with Pittsburgh and Baltimore as the two wild cards coming out of the North. I kind of did reverse reasoning when I looked at the division because, as you said, John, you could make a case for all four teams in this division making the playoffs. That is not out of this realm of possibility. So what I tried to do is I looked at each team and I said, well, let's go for some reasons why they won't make it, as opposed to why they will make it. And the only team that I could knock out was Cleveland. I'm not a Deshaun Watson guy for starters, and so that was a big negative there, and I wound up leaving them out. Pittsburgh, I go back to Tomlin. You talked about it before, Lance, the consistency. I strongly believe in consistency. Look, I've talked to Mike Sullivan. He's with the Steelers offensive staff, from the Giants. He strongly believes that Kenny Pickett is going to take another step into being one of the really good quarterbacks in this league. I tend to believe him. I don't think the Pickett's going to be elite, but I think he's going to be in the upper half of the quarterbacks in this league. I do like his potential. Najee Harris is there to help out in the running game. On the other side of the fence, when I looked at Baltimore, you guys know I'm not a big Lamar Jackson guy, but they've added so many weapons that it should make things a lot easier for him. I see a big weakness at right tackle with former Jet and Washington Commander Morgan Moses. To me, that's dangerous. If Morgan Moses is one of your tackles, that's a very, very dangerous thing for your quarterback.
And by the way, Paul, Stanley on the left tackle can't stay healthy. Ronnie Stanley.
He's been hurt a lot. So I think that Baltimore, to me, is the third place team. And I'm going to put them in the wild card, but I'm going Pittsburgh as number 2 on the strength of Pickett. And I don't think I even have to talk to you about Cincinnati. We all know what they've got offensively, and we all know what we think about Lou Anarumo, as Lance already expressed. So I've got Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, and Baltimore getting into the playoffs.
Yeah, I'm on board with everything you said about Cincinnati, guys. Agreed. Joe Burrow's awesome. Their receivers are awesome. They've done a lot to improve that offensive line. They have not only are better there, they have depth there as well. And then Lou Anarumo is a good defensive coordinator, and they have good players. So I think Cincinnati wins the division, but they don't run away with it. I agree. I think Baltimore finishes in second here. I do worry about the health of that wide receiver group. They added guys, but does Beckham stay healthy? Does Bateman stay healthy? These guys have a long history of injuries. I think that's an issue there. And I do think the Lamar Jackson adjustment to a different offensive system is fascinating to me. To me, this is a top 5 story in the NFL in 2023, right? I go back when everyone complained about the Seahawks. Oh, let Russ cook. Then they tried to let Russ cook. It worked for like 7 games. Then all of a sudden people were like, maybe you want to take Russ out of the kitchen. So I'm curious to see if you give Lamar a lot more how he handles it. I think he'll be okay with it. I think he'll be fine. But what's the ceiling of his throwing ability in the passing game? I think it'll be really interesting to see how he works in this different offensive system. If he really takes to it and he's great, which I think is very possible, or is what he's shown as a passer in the prior system, is that his ceiling? So I think that's interesting. All right, I'm making the case for Cincinnati, for Cleveland rather. I have Cleveland as my wild card team coming out of this division, and here's why. I think the Steelers are good. I think they're going to finish at 500, maybe better. And I don't quite trust Kenny Pickett the way I trust the other quarterbacks in this division, though. I'm not quite sure about Deshaun Watson, but I can't imagine he forgot how to play football. Last year when he came back and he played, he was bad. When he played last year, he was legitimately bad, one of the worst quarterbacks in the league. But with the full offseason back on the field, I have to have some confidence in that system, with that running game, with that offensive line, with pretty good weapons too, with Amari Cooper and the other guys they have there. They pick up Elijah Moore. I think he's going to be a really nice weapon for them too, that he's going to be better. Is he going to be what he was before he had all the off the field issues? I don't know that. But I think he'll be better. And then I think Jim Schwartz being added as defensive coordinator is a big deal. I think he's very solid. He knows what he's doing. I think Myles Garrett's going to have his highest sack total year of his career, playing that wide 9 that Jim Schwartz likes to play, right? So I think the defense will be better, and I think the Cleveland Browns will figure out a way to get into the playoffs as the final wild card team in the AFC North. Run or walk with Giants legends. The Giants Foundation will host a 5K racing kids run presented by Quest on Sunday, October 8th at 9 a.m. at MetLife Stadium. Net proceeds will benefit the Giants Foundation. All participants will receive a commemorative T-shirt after the race day for a post-race festival with appearances by Giants legends and a live DJ. Register now at giants.com/5K. The 2023 NFL schedule is officially out, and single-game tickets are now on sale. Don't miss the Giants at MetLife Stadium this season. Visit giants.com/tickets to secure your seat. All right, so I am going to go now to the AFC East. I'll lead us off here. I think people are sleeping on Buffalo a little bit. I know they did not finish the season well last year, but if you look at their overall numbers, their EPA, point differential, all that stuff, it's still right at the top of the league. They add Dalton Kincaid on offense. I think that's your secondary receiver after Stephon Diggs. You watch our draft coverage. You guys know what I think of Dalton Kincaid. I think he's fantastic. He's going to be a great player. Now, they did lose their starting middle linebacker on defense. They're not going to have Von Miller for the first 4 games. Unfortunately for the Giants, they play the Bills in week 6, so the odds are he'll be back by then. But I still think the Bills' defense is good. They managed to bring back their safeties, which I know is a big part of their defense. They have a very strong front. And I think they'll have a better running game with James Cook. You have Damian Harris and Latavius Murray, who can kind of take on some of that between the tackle stuff they'll want to do. I think they will take some stuff off Josh Allen's plate and make it a little bit easier for him. So I do have the Buffalo Bills here winning this division. And after writing down a couple different teams, I do not have a wild card team coming out of the AFC East. My 3 wild card teams are Baltimore, Cleveland, and the LA Chargers. And the reason is simple. If you look at the 8 toughest strength of schedules in the NFL this year, 4 from the NFC East, the other 4 are from the AFC East. Miami is the 2nd hardest. The Patriots have the 4th hardest. The Bills have the 7th hardest. And who am I missing there? And the Jets have the 6th hardest. So I had the Jets in. I ended up taking them out for the Chargers just because of the strength of schedule and the division they're going to have to be in. And the Jets' offensive line, Paul, you brought this up a lot. That is something that can short-circuit a season. We've seen it here. If an offensive line can't function, I don't mean not being really good, but can't function, that can really hinder an offense. I still think the Jets will be good. I think the Jets will win a minimum of 9 games. Because of the strength of schedule, I had them falling out of the playoffs. And just real quick on the Dolphins, just can't trust Tua to stay healthy. So I didn't want to go there, even though I think Mike McDaniel is a really good offensive coach. And the Patriots, I think their defense will be really good. At some point, though, they got to invest on more weapons on offense. They just don't have enough big play guys on offense for me to really buy into them. And that's kind of where I stand there. Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm going with Buffalo again. I do believe you're right that Buffalo had a better season than what they really put out there in a 1-loss record last season. This team still has a window. I said, well, what do you think Leonard Floyd has left? I mean, that was a big signing for them. They think that he can really help their pass rush. I know that Rousseau has never truly lived up to his potential. Ed Oliver has never lived up to his potential either as a first-round draft choice in the middle of that defensive line. But they still got Matt Milano, who came off a heck of a season last year. They, Poyer and Hyde are there at the safeties. I mean, those guys are stalwarts. I kept trying to knock them down. I couldn't do it, John. I couldn't knock them down. They're winning this division. My other pick is a gut pick. I don't have any legitimate reason to do it. I went with the Miami Dolphins. I do not like Tua. I've never been a big fan of Tua. I don't believe in his durability. I've always thought that the injuries that he had in college will catch up to him in the NFL. But there's something about the rest of that Dolphins team and that coaching staff that has that it factor of energetic, positive vibe, togetherness, like we're the upstarts. We're going to do something to surprise people. Behind Jacksonville, I think they're the other younger team in the National Football League that's kind of starting to ascend. So I strictly went with a gut feel. I'm going to go with the Dolphins. They'll get crushed in the first round of the playoffs, but I think they're going to sneak in. And I'm all in. I'm all in, by the way, on the Jets' offensive line being the Achilles and the downfall of the Jets. And you're right about the Patriots. I just don't think they have enough offensively.
Well, I think this division is just as tough as the AFC North. I'd put the North right ahead for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned. I have two teams coming out of this division, and I have the Jets winning the AFC East. Listen, I'm with you in terms of the offensive line potentially being the Achilles heel, but what I have confidence in is Aaron Rodgers is going to be able to help overshadow that group. There's going to be things he's going to do at the line of scrimmage that are going to cover up some of their shortcomings, whether it be getting rid of the football, changing the play. Aaron has one of the best touchdown to interception ratios in the NFL. So a lot of my logic is the things that Zach Wilson couldn't do, the things that Mike White couldn't do, Aaron is not going to be a question in that department. And if you add up fewer interceptions, fewer bad decisions, helping the defense in field position, you do that 16 to 17 times, guys, over the course of the season, that's going to show up in the win-loss column. And that defense is legit. That defense has not lost anybody, barring injury. That was a top 10 unit last year. I don't get overwhelmed by strength of schedule. I know John referenced a lot of it. You know, guys, how I feel about strength of schedule. It's based on records from the previous season, and we have no idea how things are going to pan out. I'm not debating and doubting that it's a tough division, and they have the NFC East on the schedule. But for all we know, some of these teams are going to fall off a cliff. And I have no idea. I have no idea what these teams are going to look like in week 14 or week 15. So I'm going based on how I feel about the Jets overall. I do think they are going to live up to the hype, and they're going to live up to the buzz because it's a huge upgrade at quarterback. And it's very hard for me to overlook that. Not to mention, they brought over a lot of guys that Aaron has familiarity with. Alan Lazard, Randall Cobb. You know, he doesn't have to work out issues. And Garrett Wilson's looked pretty good during camp in the preseason. Okay, so I don't really think it's going to be a huge learning curve. So I have the Jets winning the division. You guys made a case in terms of the Buffalo Bills that everybody wants them to take a step back. I have them winning a wild card, but let me add a few other question marks and why I don't have them winning the division. Nobody's talking about Sean McDermott taking over as the defensive coordinator.
Good point.
Leslie Frazier's not there anymore. So that means that Sean's got to be the head coach and he has to be the play caller. Do I think Sean could do both? Sure. Andy Reid, Doug Peterson could do both, but he hasn't done it. 2017 was his first year that he came over. Leslie Frazier has been calling defensive plays. And we talked about this when Ben McAdoo was the play caller here with the Giants. It's not so much that during the week, it's during the game. Paul, you're not in your head because you talk about this a lot. When the defense comes off the field, Sean McDermott wants to make tweaks. Is he going to have a staff member do that? Or is he going to talk to the defense? And does that mean that he's not going to be paying attention to what goes on the offensive side of the ball?
I do think, Lance, it's easier to do that on defense than on offense.
And that may be the case.
And there are a lot of core veteran defensive players on this unit.
Sure. No doubt about it. And I think that's going to help him. But it's at least a question worth posing about how it impacts the dynamics. I think the defense struggled last season because a lot of the injuries you referenced. And I think having those guys back will be huge. But when Von Miller went down on Thanksgiving, that pass rush was never the same. So 100%. I agree with Paul. Leonard Floyd is the X factor here. He had 18 and a half sacks in the last two seasons combined, and they were even 9 and 9.5. If he can take advantage of whatever his matchups are, that will go a long way to help the Bills navigate those first four games. And then when Von comes back, now you're talking about a nice 1-2 punch. And on offense, while I want to believe, John, that this is the season, they're going to take a little bit more off the shoulders of Josh Allen. When I see it, I'll believe it. Okay. Fair. You could tell me they bring in 17 running backs. That man is going to run 121 times this season. Okay. Now, I will say this. I like Damian Harris and Latavius Murray getting some red zone opportunities, which maybe alleviates the Josh Allen hits. But there's no way that Ken Dorsey is going to see the light this year and say, yeah, Josh will run 80 times instead of 120 times. So the reason I throw that out is, remember, guys, he had an elbow injury that a lot of people don't talk about. That impacted the offense. Does it hurt him if he continues to run? That's why I have the Bills with all those question marks I mentioned. You can argue Buffalo maybe has more questions than the Jets, which is crazy to say, but that's why I have them taking a wild card as opposed to winning the division.
All right, so why don't we do our AFC title game first, and we won't give the winner yet. We'll wait till we do a Super Bowl for that. So my AFC title game, I have Bills and Bengals. Lance, how about you?
And this was tough for me because, every year you say, is this a year you really want to bet against the Kansas City Chiefs? And then all of a sudden they laugh at everybody throughout the course of the AFC landscape. I'm very high on the Baltimore Ravens, as I laid out. And I think that this could be a year where I understand Lamar's got to stay healthy, but I do like the play caller, Todd Monken. You look at what he did at Georgia. You look at what he's done at some other teams. I think Baltimore's in good hands. So I like Ravens, Jets in the AFC Championship game.
Paulie?
I went Kansas City and Cincinnati.
Okay. All right. So let's go to the NFC now, guys. And before we start, I'll just say this. My three AFC teams that were kind of like the first out of the playoffs, the Jets, the Steelers, and the Dolphins. I would have any of those three teams winning both the NFC North and the NFC South. Just for the record, I just want to put that out there as to how much better I think the AFC is right now than the NFC. So let's start there, but we'll go out west. Paul, why don't you lead us off with the NFC West here, where I don't want to, get a little presumptuous, but I think picking the winner out there is probably one of the easier things we'll do all show.
Yeah. We'll just pass San Francisco right along because there's no point in discussing them. I mean, look, I will say this. At least they finally made the correct decision, and they're going to have Purdy be the quarterback, and they got rid of that other rookie that they never should have taken in the first round by trading him to Dallas. Trey Lance would have been a horrible mistake for them. It would have short-circuited them again, but they've made that move, and they've gotten rid of him. So good for them, and that will allow them a clean path to the playoffs. The question for me becomes Seattle. If you really do believe in Geno Smith, Seattle's got enough, and they've retooled their roster over the last year and a half to the point where they're going to be very competitive. I do think the Rams have crumbled and are on the way down still to this point. I don't think they're coming back. And I certainly don't think that we have anything to say nice about the Arizona Cardinals, who are simply a mess. So given the fact that it's really kind of an easy division, I'll say even though Geno's going to fall off, they will sneak in and they will be a wild card team. And that's hard for me to say because I'm not a Geno Smith guy, but I can't deny what he did last year. And I'll give them a wild card spot. But they're just going to sneak in. They're going to be the third wild card.
Yeah, look, I think they're talented, Seattle, but I think if you look at their offensive production the last 6 or 7 games of last year, I think it did take a dip. Geno's performance took a little bit of a dip. He's got great wide receivers. He has a good pair of running backs. He's got 2 good young offensive tackles. He's got a pretty good offensive line. So, you check all those boxes, and I think they're in the wild card mix. I think they're going to be one of the few teams that are kind of in that last wild card mix. I think they'll come up just short. I think a couple of those Geno passes that he fit into really tight areas last year where we're wowed, like, oh, what a throw. Maybe those get picked this year instead, right? So I just think things go a little bit worse for Seattle. It doesn't mean they're not on a good path. I think they have a really good, young, talented team. Their arrow is pointing up. I just think this year they take a little bit of a step back and they do not make it. San Francisco, the class of the division. Obviously, I think they're going to win your 12, 13 games again. They're going to be right there to try to go to the Super Bowl once again. The Rams, they'll be better, but instead of winning 4 games, they'll win 6, something like that.
Yeah.
And then for the Cardinals, just get in your tank, start rolling. Caleb Williams or Drake May all the way.
You know what's funny, John? For years, people always talked about how Belichick and the Patriots played in the AFC least and that they had a lot of more of an easier path than most people did as they continued to run roughshod, putting up double-digit wins. Well, for years, Bill Walsh and the 49ers had a similar situation in the NFC West when there was a lot of subpar seasons for that division, and they continuously pumped out double-digit wins and get higher playoff seeds. I'm not so sure that we're not looking at the same thing again for the next couple of years for San Francisco.
Well, I'm having a mental fart here. I'm trying to think of the old NFC West. It was the Saints. It was the Rams. It was the 49ers. What was the fourth team?
Well, the Cardinals were Phoenix. They were still out there.
No, the Cardinals played in the NFC.
Well, they were in the NFC East. Yeah,
No, I'm talking about after they moved over.
No, I'm trying to think of what it was when it was a 4-team division. Who was the fourth team in the old NFC West? I can't remember. It was the Saints. It was the Rams. It was the 49ers. Who was the fourth team? I don't remember.
Seattle.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, of course. They're still in there now. Duh.
Yeah.
Sorry. No,
because
absolutely.
Seattle was originally an AFC team.
Correct.
And then they flopped over to the NFC.
No, yeah, so it wasn't Seattle. No, they were in the AFC.
Oh, yeah, because they were in the AFC.
No, but that was only for a couple of years. It wasn't that long.
All right, Lance, what do you think of the NFC West?
Okay, so I'm the one that gets us off this topic and this debate, I guess.
You do, yes.
Well,
the bottom line is San Francisco's kind of got a bye to the playoffs with this division. I think we all agree.
Well, I wouldn't sell Seattle short, and I know you have them in as a wild card, and I do too, Paul. Here's the thing. The Seahawks are like the Steelers. I don't think people take into consideration what Pete Carroll has done for that team since he arrived. First 2 years, sub 500 since 2012 to the present day. They've had one losing record, guys. That's it. Everybody counts them out. And when Russell Wilson left, nobody gave them an ounce of respect. So much like Pittsburgh, I do not underestimate the Seattle Seahawks. Here's the other thing. Jackson Smith and Jigba, they drafted. So now you got him, you got DK Metcalf, and you got Tyler Lockett. That's a pretty impressive trio of wide receivers. John brought up the running backs. I think the defense has come a long way. Remember, they went through that transition. They lost a lot of the Legion of Boom players. And little by little, I think they got their mojo back. So while Geno Smith had as many turnover-worthy plays as Josh Allen last season, which is what John was referencing, 29, and that was tied for last in the NFL, according to Pro Football Focus, I do think Jackson Smith and Jigba, a little bit more of an emphasis on the run game maybe this season will help balance those things out because, guys, keep in mind, Dak Prescott had 15 interceptions last season, but he was middle of the pack in turnover-worthy plays. You know those numbers don't always add up, and they don't always duplicate year to year. So I do like Seattle as a wild card, and I like San Francisco winning the division, but let's not overlook a few factors here. Brock Purdy played not even half a season, okay? He's got to do it for a full season before we just assume, Paul, as you were mentioning, that the Niners have this clear pathway to run away with the NFC West. It's a very tiny sample size. And, oh, by the way, Kyle Shanahan, in 4 of his 6 seasons as the head coach, you could say all you want about Trey Lance. This is why I would have made an argument to keep Trey Lance. He has had to utilize 3 quarterbacks in 4 of those 6 seasons where they've had a minimum of 2 starts. So who's to say that Brock Purdy and Sam Darnold, who also hasn't stayed healthy throughout his career, hold up this year? I love the defense. I love the addition of Javon Hargrave in the middle. I think that's going to be huge. Guys, Nick Bosa, like Chris Jones, holding out, not happy about his contract. Let's see how that plays out. But San Francisco has a lot to prove before I pen them in as the tone setters. And this is all you need to know about the Rams. Matthew Stafford's wife does a podcast. I don't know if you saw, guys, the headline. She was claiming that he can't relate to the roster. And the reason why he can't relate to the roster is because they're all young. If you did an exercise and said, do I recognize anybody on defense, you'd be hard-pressed. They have a rookie punter. They have a rookie kicker. They have a rookie long snapper. The long snapper is brand new to the NFL, guys, okay? The Rams are on a youth movement. It's going to have some growing pains as a result of the makeup of that roster. So, yeah, the other half of that division, it's going to be a fair share of ups and downs. That goes without saying.
And by the way, just credit the Niners. The fact that they've been able to have this success, Lance, to your point, with all these different quarterbacks is such a credit to Kyle Shanahan and those coaches over there. Just what an unbelievable job. And I promise you at some point, Sam Darnold's going to play a few games this year, and people are going to be like, oh, man, did Kyle Shanahan fix Sam Darnold? No, he's just that good of an offensive coordinator, and it's unbelievable what he's done there. And by the way, it was the Falcons. I forgot. It was the Falcons in the NFC West.
Going back way back.
I was talking like late 80s, early 90s. So, yeah, it was the Falcons, Saints, Rams,
and actually, I shouldn't have mentioned Walsh because that probably screwed up all of our brains anyway because that's going way back.
Yes, you did. Absolutely. That's
going way back when Brett Favre, by the way, was on the Atlanta Falcons before he was traded to the Green Bay Packers.
You're right. Absolutely. All right. So let's go NFC South next. I'll lead us off here. Why not? This was tough for me, but I'm going to land on the New Orleans Saints. And I think they're still good defensively. They have a lot of talent. I'm not sure about Dennis Allen as a head coach. But if you look at their point differential last year, they actually had the best point differential in that division. They had the point differential that was better than the Giants. They just lost a lot of close games and didn't make the playoffs. And that was with their quarterback situation being an absolute disaster. I mean, their quarterback situation, they're moving guys in and out. They just didn't have very good players there, right? And then a lot of injuries. Say what you want about Derek Carr. He's a competent NFL quarterback. You know, he's the 17th best quarterback in football, wherever you want to slot him. He is Chris Olave, who's a good receiver. I mean, Michael Thomas, when he plays, 10 games in a year again, I'll believe it when I see it. Kamara's only gone for 3 games. They have other running backs there, Ken J. Miller, who they drafted, who are pretty good. I think their offensive line is fine. And I know I brought up the other side of this for the other division, but I have it here too. The Falcons have the easiest schedule in football. The Saints have the second easiest schedule in football. The Panthers have the 6th. So they play the AFC South this year, just like the NFC East did last year. So that's going to help the records in this division an awful lot. You have a rookie quarterback for the Panthers. So I think the Saints figure out how to win this division. I wouldn't be surprised if the Saints won double-digit games because of their schedule. I could see them winning 11 or 12 games this year. That would not surprise me because their schedule is not very difficult. And because of that and the weakness at the bottom end of this division, I don't think the Panthers and the Bucs are going to be very good. And again, you're playing the AFC South. I have the Falcons in as a wild card team. I think the Arthur Smith offense this year in Atlanta is going to be fascinating. You have all these guys that can run the ball. They can also play wide receiver, the Bijan Robinsons, the Cordero Pattersons. They have Kyle Pitts. They have Drake London. Am I a Desmond Ridder believer? I am not. But he has such a good offensive line in front of him and such good weapons around him. All he needs to do is be competent. And I think he'll be competent. I do worry about their defense. It's young. It's unproven. There's a lot of guys there where their pass rush is coming from. So I do think they'll figure out a way to get to 9 and be one of the wild card teams. So I have the Saints winning the division. I think they'll be in the mix for even one of the top 2 seeds in the conference, to be honest with you, again, because of that record, because of that schedule. And I have the Falcons in as a wild card team, and then with the Bucs and the Panthers on the outside looking in. Lance, how about you?
Yeah, I actually have the identical setup to you. I am extremely high on the Atlanta Falcons. They are my sneaky team. I have them in as a wild card. I will just piggyback off of what you said, and I'll make a case for the defense. I actually think the defense has a lot of potential because Ryan Nielsen was brought over. He was on the Saints staff last year. He brought over plenty of players that were with him. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at Atlanta, and I'm not throwing out John Abraham's name. That's how far you have to go back, guys, to the last time they had an emerging pass rusher. Now, all of a sudden, you look at David Onyemata and Caden Ellis, who come over from New Orleans. Grady Jarrett's still there. Calais Campbell. I understand some of these guys are up there in age like Campbell, but as a group, I think the group is stronger. And let's not forget, they added Jesse Bates at safety from Cincinnati, one of the best safeties in the NFL. Jeff Okudah had a great year with Detroit. He started to get his act together. They acquired him. Richie Grant, A.J. Terrell, recent draft picks. Atlanta has playmakers on every level. And I think Arthur Smith, what he's going to do, John, as you were alluding to, he's duplicating Tennessee. He was with the Titans. And what did Tennessee do? They pounded the ball with Derrick Henry, Ryan Tannehill. He utilized the weapons around him. They had the A.J. Browns. They had these big wide receivers. He's got big targets in Kyle Pitts and Drake London. He has the elusiveness of Cordero Patterson to complement Bijan Robinson. Ridder doesn't have to be an all-star.
And Tyler Algier, by the way, who was great last year too.
Well, he set the single-season rushing record for the Falcons. So the point is, Ridder has an environment, and we look for this for young quarterbacks, where he doesn't have to throw for 35 touchdowns. Protect the football, get the ball in the hands of the playmakers. I think this Atlanta team is going to be a tough out. And New Orleans has the most proven quarterback. They also have a team that has played together. Jamal Williams is the other running back, by the way, that I would throw out, who came over from Detroit. Remember, he led the NFL in rushing last season. So I think they're going to be able to survive the absence of Alvin Kamara in the early stages of the season. And I think Carr also is hungry. Not that he has played bad, but he did have a down year last year. I think a new team, a refresher for him, and some of the young guys, Chris Olave, even if Michael Thomas, who has only played 10 games in the last 3 seasons, even if he gives them 10, 11 games, that would be a huge step in the right direction. There's too much talent on that New Orleans team and too much unproven areas outside the division. It would be a huge disappointment if the Saints don't win the South. So the Saints, the division winner, and Atlanta, a very strong team that people are sleeping on to claim a wild card.
How about you, Paulie?
Yeah, well, you know how I feel about Carr. I've always been a big Carr guy. So by far, he's the best quarterback in the division. Now, I do have a concern about the Saints. Cameron Jordan is older than Methuselah, and so is the Honey Badger. And these are two starters on that team that are being asked to do an awful lot.
It's fair.
So that is an issue for me. But I do believe that Derek Carr and, of course, Michael Thomas is coming off of, 25 years of straight injuries? I mean,
he has bad ankles.
You know,
yes.
I mean, I get
a little hyperbole there, but point well taken.
You know what I'm talking about. So
he's almost like the Grant Hill of the NFL when he had all those ankle injuries for
Detroit. There you go, John. So, I mean, those are my biggest problems where if those things go right, yeah, they're winning the division. If those things go wrong, they could burn and allow the Falcons to steal the division. Now, I like what all you guys said about the Falcons being a contender because it is a weak division. I don't believe in Young in Carolina. I don't believe in Mayfield in Tampa Bay. Ritter's not going to be asked to do a lot, and that's the whole reason. Look, they drafted Bijan Robinson with the same intent when the Giants drafted Barkley, that he would be a weapon, that he would be the bulk of the offense. It's going to revolve around him. It's not going to revolve around Ritter. They want him to manage a game. So I'm going to go New Orleans wins the division, despite the questions, and Atlanta sneaking in ahead of Seattle as the second wild card team.
I'm sure, Lance, you're like, I'm going to have – we're all on the same page with Atlanta. Lance's little sleeper team, not a sleeper, apparently.
Apparently not within this group. I think, though, outside of this little Zoom bubble, I think other people would perhaps differ. So I'll still gladly have them as the label of a sleeper. Paul, why don't you lead us off on the NFC North?
Yeah, well, it's Detroit. It's Detroit, it's Detroit, it's Detroit, and it's Detroit. That to me is obviously the team that I mentioned, Jacksonville in the AFC, that's got the big arrow shooting up. Detroit's the big young team that everybody loves in the NFC that has the arrow shooting up. And obviously the way they performed for Coach Dan Campbell last season, folks are thinking that the best is yet to come for them. I'm not impressed with the division, okay? I have no idea what Love is going to do in Green Bay, but I don't like the Packers anyway. I think Minnesota, they had their shot. Their defense is still a mess. They tried to do a couple of things to tinker with it, but you can't fix a Kleenex tissue paper thin defense in 1 year. You just can't do it. So I don't like that. And Chicago, there are going to be some people who want to pick Chicago. Maybe the two of you guys will. I understand that. But I'm not a big Justin Fields guy either. So I'm going with Detroit as the only playoff team as the winner in that division.
Lance, how about you?
I'm with Paul. The Lions is my lone representative out of the North. I have them winning the division. Jacksonville, I think, is a good comparison. The coaching staff did a nice job turning that team around, and continuity they will benefit from as well. And I thought they started to really get their act together and chemistry showcased late last season. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to roll over, but I do think the Lions will have a better start. Remember, they were 1-6 last season after the first 7 games, and that's what did them in. They went into Lambeau Field. They beat the Packers. So even if you show a little improvement in the early stages of the season, that should be good enough to balance things out and win this division. As far as the other teams are concerned, everyone else, I think, has a bigger question mark. Packers, Jordan Love, I'm sure, learned a lot from Aaron Rodgers. But, guys, that's a very young roster. If you look at average age, the Packers are just as young as the Rams.
Lance, and Jordan Love is like the veteran on offense.
Exactly. Yeah. I want to say they may have an average age of about 25 years old, which is absolutely insane. It's not that I'm down on Jordan Love. It's he needs guys to step up around him. Remember, Byron learned this the hard way last year. Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, they're not finished products coming out of the draft. So how much do those two guys improve? And the defense and the special teams at times has been a little bit iffy for the Packers. So that's that. Then you look at the Bears. I do think Chicago deserves credit. They upped that talent pool around Justin Fields this year. You got to give him credit. Last year, he didn't have a lot to work with. DJ Moore coming over from Carolina, Robert Tonyan, the tight end from the Packers, the offensive line, still a question mark, but they at least address some areas of it. The defense, though, where's the pass rush coming from, guys? That concerns me. So, once again, multiple questions. And then Minnesota, well, we talked a lot about this because the Giants played the Vikings multiple times late last season. They're not winning 11 games. They're not going 11-0 in one-score games. That's not happening in back-to-back years. I do think, though, Brian Flores, Paul, I think he's going to improve that defense. Listen, can they get any worse? They were dead last in the NFL.
Can't get worse.
So, I mean, by default, Paul, they're going to improve. But how much are they going to improve? That's the thing. And if the offense, which doesn't have Adam Thielen and Dalvin Cook, I understand Justin Jefferson and KJ Osborne and Alexander Madison may be attractive, but those were two veteran staples on the offensive side of the ball. So emerging questions overwhelmingly outside of Detroit. That's why I think the Lions have a pretty solid path, barring injury, to win this division.
All right. I had Detroit written down too, and then I decided I need to be a little bit different here. I'm going to go Packers. I do worry about Detroit's defense. I don't think they really made any significant additions in the offseason. I don't think their defense was very good last year. They still don't have that home run hitter on offense. Jahmyr Gibbs is a good addition, but he's a running back. Jamison Williams is suspended. And when he gets back, what is Jamison Williams? So who's their over-the-top big play guy? Jared Goff's a good, solid quarterback. They have a good offensive line. I think the Lions will be good. But it's still the Lions. And they have the tendency to kind of get their fans excited and then crush their souls. So I'm going to go on the side of history here, and I'm also going to look at the Packers. The reviews on Jordan Love so far this offseason have been very positive. Talking to people that cover the team up there, the team's very excited for what he's going to do. Now, I don't think he's going to be a star. I don't think he's going to be a Pro Bowler, but I think he is a pretty good environment in front of him on the offensive line. They have a good run game. I like their young receiving core, even though it's young. I think the rookie out of Michigan State in the slot's going to be good. Romeo Doubs in a second year, Christian Watson in a second year. Reed is the slot out of Michigan State. Yeah. And their defense is very talented. Now, I hope Joe Barry gets a little bit more aggressive on that side of the ball. Their defensive coordinator, I feel they were too passive. You know, Rashawn Gary, I think, could have a breakout year. If you look at his sacks per snap and pressures per snap rates last year, they were some of the best in the league, like comparable to Myles Garrett. So I think the Packers defense will be a lot better. I think both these teams will be around 500. I think the winner of the division probably wins only 9 games. Maybe they get to 10. But I'm going to go with Green Bay. I think they're going to kind of eke it out over Detroit. I think both those teams will be okay. And I think the Vikings will be right there too. Look, I think their defense, to Lance's point, will be better. They still have a very talented offense. Kirk Cousins is a good NFL quarterback. I think Alexander Madison's going to be fine. They add Jordan Addison, the talented wide receiver out of USC and Pitt, to go next to Jefferson. Hawkinson was one of the best tight ends in football when he got there last year. Offensive line, we'll see how much better it is. I'm not sure about that. But I think the Vikings will be around 500. But what the heck? I'll be a little bit different. And I think this will also be fun that the Packers make the playoffs this year and the Jets don't, in my predictions, which will make two fan bases pretty emotional on opposite ends of the spectrum. Paul, why don't you lead us off on the NFC East?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Philadelphia Eagles, we've been talking about them all during the offseason. They've really done nothing to be knocked off their perch as the most talented overall roster in the NFC for sure. I don't see them losing the division. I do think that the gap has narrowed between the Giants and Philadelphia, and even potentially between Dallas and Philly just a little bit. But I'm not going to change what I've believed now for several months. Philly's winning the division. The Giants are going to finish in second. The Giants may win as many as 11 games this year. I think they're a 10-win team. I'm going to put it down now. I always tell people I'll wait to the 53. The Giants are a 10-win team, maybe 11. The schedule's a lot more difficult, but I think the talent has been upgraded significantly, especially at the weakest spots in their starting lineup. I think the depth has been enhanced, and I'm buying what every coach and every player in that building is saying, and that is comfort level within the year 2 of the system. Everybody is preaching that from the high heavens. And I'm going to buy that because I see it firsthand at practice every day. So it's Philly and it's the Giants. And I'm not going anywhere else Dallas and Philly, Dallas and Washington, you guys are outside looking in.
All right, I'm going to switch this up a little bit because I do think Philly's the most talented team in the division, but they were also one of the healthiest teams in football last year. They were just healthy most of the year. I think that probably changes a little bit. And Lance, what's the famous stat? When's the last time the same team has won the NFC East 2 consecutive years?
That would be 2001 to 2004. Eagles 4 in a row.
I think the streak continues. So I am going to say Dallas wins the NFC East. They beat Philly by a game. One team wins, let's say, because again, the NFC East is one of the tougher strength of schedules in football. So I'm going to say Dallas wins 11, Philly wins 10, Dallas ekes them out for the division. And look, Dallas won 12 games last year. Their point differential was similar to Philadelphia. They add Stephon Gilmore. They add Brandon Cooks. They don't lose anyone super significant. Dalton Schultz is the one guy you lose. Otherwise, they brought back pretty much everybody that they had last season.
Kellen Moore.
They lose Kellen Moore as an offensive coordinator, sure, but the offense, based on the people I've talked to down there, is still 75% the same. So I don't think that's going to change in terms of offensive structure much. You do worry about Mike McCarthy, how that adjusts the play calling stuff, how the end of game stuff works with him. That's always been a concern with them. I agree with that. But they're still extremely talented. And I've already annoyed Giant fans with this offseason. I figure I just lean into it a little bit so they can really get mad at me. So I'm going to go Dallas wins the division. Philly's the next wild card team. And then I think the Giants make the playoffs with 9 wins. I think they go 9-8 this year. Again, they were 9-7-1 last year. I totally agree with Paul. I think they're a much more talented team. I think they're a better team. I think the arrow is pointed up. I think they have significantly closed the gap with Dallas and Philadelphia. I think they're much closer than they've been probably since 2016 when they won the division, right? I think the Giants are pointing in the right direction. I just think the schedule is extremely tough. As you see with my predictions, I'm really weighing heavily into that, guys. I think it matters. Opponents matter. And I think the Giants will be a much better team. I think their point differential might even be better this year. I just think the schedule will make it tough for them to have a better record. But I do think at 9-8, they will still figure out a way to get the wild card and they will get into the postseason. And that's how I see the NFC East being. Look, I just think Philly's defense could take a step back here. Not so much with their coordinator. I don't think Jonathan Gannon's a great coordinator, but I do think their talent has taken a little bit of a step back, especially at linebacker and then to a lesser extent safety. So I think they do take a little bit of a step back there. And I just think Dallas figures out a way to get one more win. If they finish tied, that wouldn't surprise me. If Philly wins the division, that wouldn't surprise me. I think those two teams will be neck and neck all year, and I do think the Giants are talented enough to win, to get a wild card spot. And much like I said with the AFC teams, if the Giants were in the NFC North or NFC South, I would pick them to win either one of those divisions. Lance, wrap us up.
Yeah, I have the Cowboys winning the division and the Eagles grabbing a wild card. The bottom line is I'm a big believer in track record. It's not to say that the Giants haven't improved. I think that goes without saying, but Dallas and Philly have been fixtures in this division, and there haven't been overwhelming changes where I see either of those teams falling off. And the trenches question still remains. The Giants went out. They added to their offensive line, but I think the interior of the offensive line, guys, needs to show that it can handle what Dallas and Philadelphia present on the defensive side of the ball. And then in terms of the Giants being able to put pressure on Dak and Jalen Hurts with guys like A'Shaun Robinson and Nacho, let's see if these guys hold up. They've been a little bit banged up during the course of the offseason. Bobby Okereke, it all looks good on paper, but we've got to see it first before we know that that gap indeed has been closed. Because if you're not going to stop the run, get after the quarterback, and protect your quarterback from the pass rush, it's a problem when you're going up against a team like Philadelphia and Dallas that we know have depth there and have very aggressive fronts. So that's going to determine how much of an inroad I think the Giants can make within this division. Dak Prescott, everything's been made about his 15 interceptions. I alluded to this earlier. A lot of his interceptions were off of wide receivers' fingertips and their chests. Okay, context matters. I don't see him having another 15 interception season. His highest previously was 13. I think the arrival of Brandon Cooks is huge because you could argue they never made up for the loss of Amari Cooper last season. And that is where he comes in. Dan Quinn has done wonders for that defense. They have continuity on that side of the ball. Mike McCarthy brought over Brian Schottenheimer. You guys were talking about Seattle earlier. Schottenheimer was there when Russell Wilson had that first half of the season where he was airing it out and they said, let Russ cook. Second half wasn't great, but Schottenheimer's a bit of an underrated offensive coordinator. I think his arrival will help make up for the absence of Kellen Moore. And Philadelphia, yes, they changed some coaches. Quarterback's coach is now the OC. So that is an internal upgrade in terms of making the change. And Sean Desai's new to the defense. I could see the defense guys struggling a little bit as they get their feet wet, but I think the law of average will pan out because a lot of the players that are filling in for some of the players they lost, like a Javon Hargrave and a C.J. Gardner-Johnson, are going to be replaced by players they drafted a year or two ago that now are going to get more playing time when they were sprinkled in previously, like a Reed Blankenship or like a Jordan Reed, for example. So the continuity factor is still there for Philadelphia. I do think it's going to be a tough division. It's going to be a battle royale, but you're not playing the AFC South. You're playing the AFC East. And that is going to make a difference why I don't think 4 teams are going to be in the thick of things like they were last year. And here's one thing I just want to throw out. Don't sleep on Washington. Yep. I don't think the Commanders are getting enough talk like the Falcons. Sam Howell and Eric Bieniemy is going to improve that offense because Sam Howell's athletic. And that defense is going to be healthier this year. I'm a little bit worried about the linebackers in the secondary, but Washington is going to be a very tough out for all 3 teams, guys. I'm not just saying it's going to be for the Giants or the Cowboys or the Eagles. They're going to have their hands full with that Washington offense. And that could very well be the determining factor as to why Dallas maybe edges out, as you were talking about, John, Philadelphia by a game because Washington could steal a contest from one of those 2 teams.
Yeah, there's no one in this division winning 14 games like the Eagles did last year. It's just not happening. It's going to be way too hard. Those 3 teams, I think, guys, I literally think we're going to be sitting here on December 25th, right on Christmas, and the Giants play the Eagles. And I think Philly, Dallas, and the Giants will all still have a chance to win this division on Christmas Day.
Is there any team in this division that's going to go 4-2 within the East?
I think whoever wins the division will.
Yeah, they're going to have to. They're going to have to because it's going to be really, really hard.
Yeah, Paul, I think that's a great point. Whichever one of these teams does better within the division is probably the team that's going to win it. I think you're 100% right about that. All right, NFC Championship game. Lance, let's start with you.
NFC Championship game, I'm going to go with the Cowboys colliding with the New Orleans Saints.
Ooh, Saints. All right, I have Dallas in the 40.
I think the Niners are a popular choice, but once again, Purdy's got to prove he can hold up, and we haven't seen that yet. So I think New Orleans, with a little bit more continuity and the proven quarterback, I'll say they surprise people against the Cowboys.
Yeah, I have Dallas and 49ers in the NFC title game. Paul?
I got San Francisco and Philadelphia.
Okay. Super Bowl. All right, I'll lead off with this. I have Bengals over Cowboys. The Bengals winning a Super Bowl for the first time in quite a while. Paul, how about you?
San Francisco over Kansas City.
Okay.
I have the Cowboys over the Ravens. I think, once again, I'm going to go back to what I said initially. The NFC pathway this year is feasible for a lot of these teams that have been knocking on the door. Mm-hmm. So Philadelphia or Dallas, if they get out of the NFC East, easily you could see a pathway because, once again, no Aaron Rodgers. The NFC South, other than Derek Carr, doesn't have a proven quarterback. The Niners have question marks, as I mentioned, because of the quarterbacks and whether or not they could hold up. So it's not crazy to say a team that gets to the playoffs consistently over the last few years, but has not been able to put it all together, can get to the promised land. And I think a team out of the NFC East doing it this year is very, very feasible as a result of that. And I'm high on the Ravens because of Todd Monken, and I think there's enough weaponry to get them by some of the injuries that they've had to deal with last season.
All right, we went a little late here, guys, so why don't we go quickly through some of these individual awards. MVP, I went Joe Burrow. I think he wins his first one. What do you guys think?
So did I. I went Burrow as well.
I love Joe Burrow, but I'm going to go a little bit more outside the box. I think Trevor Lawrence could be scratching on the surface of something very special. He looked great. Doug Peterson, see what happens when you have an adult in the room running a team? It changes things, guys, and he's got a lot of talent around him. I think Trevor is in store for having that huge third campaign in the NFL.
No, I like that one, Lance. That's a good one. All right, Offensive Player of the Year. I'm going to bet that he stays healthy, and if he does, I think Christian McCaffrey is our Offensive Player of the Year this year. Lance, how about you?
Well, it's hoping and hoping that these guys get over the injury bug. McCaffrey's a good candidate, but once again, that's more of a reason why San Francisco, Purdy, McCaffrey, Darnold, can all these guys hold up. I'm going to go with Lamar Jackson because, once again, I do think Todd Monken's going to come over. They're going to be a far more balanced attack. He has the weaponry down the field. He's got to stay healthy, too, just like Christian McCaffrey, but the ingredients are there for Lamar to have everything click around him and live up to, obviously, the billing of that huge contract that he was given this offseason.
Paulie?
Yeah, McCaffrey is going to lead the National Football League in total yards from scrimmage, and so he's going to have to get this award.
Oh, wow. Paul, we agree on that, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought I was going to be in an island with that.
No,
right,
I have tremendous respect for McCaffrey. And it's funny because when he came out of school, I thought he was going to be a third down back. I certainly underestimated his impact in this league.
Yeah, I didn't think he'd be able to take the pounding yet either. All right, Defensive Player of the Year. I'm going to go Micah Parsons here. Paul, how about you?
Yeah, given that Dallas is going to finally decide that he's going to rush like 99% of the time, and we know that they've got other weapons on defense that will allow him to do what he does best, I think it's really why not? I mean, he's just going to have another monster year. So I'll go Parsons.
Oh, we're 3 for 3 the same,
yeah.
Paul. I don't like this at all. All right, lads, how about you?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Micah Parsons, too, so I'll make it a trio on that front. He's such a disruptive player. He's been consistent. He still has his defensive coordinator in Dan Quinn. I think that bodes well for him.
No doubt.
And Paul, you mentioned getting after the quarterback, though sometimes, as we know, things are emphasized, and that's not necessarily the story. Something tells me the Cowboys are not revealing all their cards. Just like, remember Mike McCarthy came out and said he wants to run the ball more? Yeah, as if they're going to take the ball out of Dak Prescott's hands this season and say you can't throw. So I think some of that... Yeah.
To be honest, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but it's important to note that the guys who win these awards usually make the highlight plays or the splash plays.
Sure.
Parsons is a splash play specialist.
And by the way, he was the runner-up the last 2 years. It's not like this is like a surprise.
Right.
Well, and also you look at, too, I think you would agree, guys, no matter the position, year 3 is a very critical year for all football players.
Yep.
And that holds true, right? For Micah Parsons. Same thing with Trevor Lawrence. The game slows down. If you're still in the same system, it bodes very well for you. So a lot of the environmental factors help Micah Parsons. As much as you said, Paul, he's absolutely a disruptive force and a splash guy.
All right, let's go Offensive Rookie of the Year. Let's start with you, Paul. What do you think?
I went Bijan Robinson because I think the Falcons are going to heavily lean on him like the Giants do with Barkley, like San Francisco's going to do with McCaffrey. He is going to be the engine that makes that car go. So I think no matter what other rookies have a tremendous amount of talent, and there are a few of them, this guy's going to get the most opportunity to show his wares.
Lance, how about you?
I'm with Paul. Bijan Robinson is going to be the Derrick Henry of Atlanta because of, once again, the Arthur Smith connection. They're going to lean on him. You know he's a bulldozer. Hopefully he holds up. And if he stays healthy because of the opportunities and the tone that they're going to run on offense, I don't think Cordero Patterson's going to be a huge threat to Robinson because I think, as you saw in previous years, Patterson, as great as he is and as dynamic as he is, you can't give him a full workload of a number one back. And that will actually, I think, open things up for Bijan Robinson because just when you think Patterson's going to run on an end around, they hand it back to Robinson. He goes up the gut and does plenty of damage. This is going to be, and Paul's going to love this, Atlanta's going to be that old school football team this year. Where between those two guys, they are going to pound the rock and they're going to find the end zone multiple times, whether it be short or lengthy drives. Bijan Robinson has all the opportunity in the world. He is definitely going to be the Offensive Rookie of the Year.
I have nothing to add. You guys are both correct. I'm going Bijan, too. I won't bore everybody with the same exact reasons. And he's going to be a big-time receiver for them, too, by the way. Yep. All right, Defensive Rookie of the Year. Lance, why don't we start with you on this one?
Well, I'm going to go with Will McDonald.
Ooh, I almost picked him as a sleeper, too. I like it.
Yeah, I got to think outside the box here a little bit. He's shown some flashes in the preseason, and I know that doesn't mean much of anything, but guys, look at the talent around him, okay? With what Quinnen Williams is going to do in the middle and his ability to collapse the pocket, get after the quarterback, McDonald is going to have some favorable one-on-one opportunities. And if you look at the draft, and I was looking through the draft class, and there's a lot of corners that went in the first round, and maybe a corner wow somebody. I mean, maybe a Deonte Banks has a lot of opportunistic plays because you assume teams are going to test him. I'm not ruling that out, but more often than not, it's the pass rushers. Just like we were talking about Micah Parsons. So I was looking for, okay, who has a lot of talent around him, is in a good defense, and can make some noise. It all comes back to Will McDonald. So you want to call it a sleeper? You want to call it a wild card? That's my defensive rookie of the year.
I just wonder if he'll get enough snaps because they have so many edge rushers on that team.
And that's a very fair point.
That could be the one thing that holds him back. And that's why I didn't end up going with him. But I think he might have more sacks than any rookie. You're right. Paul, how about you?
Yeah,
well, Can I give you a little Jack Campbell, middle linebacker for the Detroit Lions? We're talking about another team that's blue collar, hard nosed. They get after it. He's in the middle of that defense. We know he was the Butkus Award winner last year as the nation's top linebacker coming out of school. It was not a strong interior linebacker class. I know that. But when they picked him in the first round, they decided that he was going to be their next version of Chris Spielman. So I'm going to say that Campbell racks up a ton of tackles. And with a team that should be in the playoff mix, I think they win the division. I say he gets the trophy.
All right, Will Anderson's the low-hanging fruit here, right? And I want to pick him just so I have the best chance of being right. But I want to be interesting instead. I'm going to go Christian Gonzalez. You know, I think he wound up in a great spot in New England. Who coaches defensive backs and cornerbacks better than Bill Belichick? The answer, nobody. I think he comes out. I think the Patriots are going to have one of the best defenses in football. I think Christian Gonzalez is going to be a big part of that. And I know the guys that get the sacks usually win this award. It's easy for voters to just look at sack numbers and pick that guy. But what the heck? I'm going to go Christian Gonzalez, who wound up with New England. I think he's going to fit in there really, really well. All right, comeback player of the year. I'll lead off here. You know, I thought about Javonte Williams in Denver, but then I said, you know what? I think they really might split carries with Samaje Perine a little bit. So I'm going to go J.K. Dobbins because he's 2 years off his injury. He played well at the end of last year. He's playing for a contract. They're going to throw the ball more in Baltimore, which means probably some lighter boxes for him. And I think he's going to have a monster year because he's really, really talented. So I'm going to go J.K. Dobbins for my comeback player of the year. Lance, how about
sentimental? Can I go sentimental?
Yeah, go ahead, Paul. Yeah, please.
I think if DeMar Hamlin is able to get through this NFL season, it's going to be very hard for anybody not to vote for him.
No, that's a good one.
It's just, Paul, I find it hard that he's going to have the statistics, though, that maybe make it intriguing.
No, Lance, here's the thing. The man literally came back, and I'm not trying to be funny here. I'm being dead serious. Sure. He came back from death. I mean, the guy literally died on the field. I mean, Paul, that's a great point.
No, and listen, it's a sentimental argument. But, you know, you look at a guy like Geno Smith, for example, last season. I understand he didn't have the competition of a story like DeMar Hamlin, but the big reason why Geno won the award is his numbers jumped out, right? I mean, statistically, he had a good season, despite, once again, some of those turnover-worthy plays I referenced. And Seattle as a team did well. I just don't know if the sentimental aspect is going to sway the voters enough. But he certainly deserves consideration. There's no doubt about it. Here's the other thing to watch, too. They're moving him along little by little with Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde back. How does that impact his playing time? Remember, Hamlin played last year, Paul, because Poyer and Hyde got hurt. That's the other thing that I think is worthy of taking into consideration.
All right, Lance, where are you going here?
Calvin Ridley, to me, is intriguing. So I was heavily considering him. He's not my pick because he missed all of last season because of the suspension due to gambling. Remember, he wrote that good piece, and Trevor Lawrence could lean on him heavily, but it's too much of a wild card. So I'm going to go with the other low-hanging fruit. And we know quarterbacks are popular picks. How about Russell Wilson?
Well, yeah, hey, you do pick Denver to make the playoffs, so it makes sense.
And I think that Sean's going to have an influence on him. I think he's going to set him straight. And if there's anybody that's due for a bounce back year, and remember, if we learned anything from the Geno Smith voting, comeback player of the year is not just injury. Okay, I want to make that clear because I think a lot of people looked at it like, oh, comeback player of the year. You have to have a torn ACL, miss the season. So I should be picking Cooper Kupp or somebody like that. No, I think they made it clear it's adversity. It's being doubted. And who's been doubted more so than any other football player based on last season? And his team is an extension. It's Russell Wilson. I like the Sean Payton factor. Give me Russ, comeback player of the year.
Paul, who's your coach of the year?
I'm going to give it to the guy who a lot of people thought should have gotten it last year, because there were two guys who were really strong contenders. Peterson was a strong contender. Campbell was a strong contender. They were certainly, they would get a lot of votes. I'm going to go with Dan Campbell.
Okay. Lance, how about you?
Well, I'm jumping on this Denver bandwagon. I'm not going to jump off this stage, considering my selling point. I think Sean's arrival is once again going to do wonders for the team in the Mile High. So you look at Brian Daboll winning the award, right? Because of why? I think expectations were low for the Giants. He helped exceed that. He got the most out of that roster. Isn't Sean walking into a situation similar, right, in Denver, coming off a bad year, coming off a lot of question marks? The standards and the expectations are low. It's not an impossible situation for him to climb up that hill. Sean Payton, Coach of the Year.
And I apologize to Dave's, by the way. I shouldn't have forgotten that.
No, that's okay. We've
gone through enough
teams in the NFC
and
West in 91, yeah, so it's the same thing.
My brain is so scrambled by this point.
But there's a difference between 1991 and 2022, in fairness.
In fairness, Paul's mind, it's closer to 1991 than 2023 anyway. So
that's fair.
Yeah. All right. I came down to two guys here because, again, I think the winner of the NFC South is going to win more games than anyone expected. So is it going to be Dennis Allen or is it going to be Arthur Smith? I think those are the two guys people are going to look at here. And I think Arthur Smith's offense in Atlanta is going to be so much fun and so exciting that I think even though New Orleans is going to finish with the better record, just what Arthur Smith does with that offense in Atlanta is going to get people so excited they're going to give him the award. So I'm going to go Arthur Smith for the Falcons.
And that makes sense too. Sure.
Guys, yeah. This was fun. We went a little longer than we wanted to, but we have a long weekend, so it'll give fans a chance when they're in their car doing their Labor Day stuff, a chance to listen. Appreciate you guys being on, and we'll see you Monday when we do our first game week of the year, guys. Enjoy your Labor Day weekend.
Absolutely.
All right. We'll see you next time, everybody, on Big Blue Kickoff Live. The Giants' official connected TV streaming app, Giants TV, brings original video content and game highlights on demand and direct to Big Blue fans. Giants TV is free on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire TV, and the Giants mobile app.